Yes, hello, folks. Welcome to episode 3 of the weekly Manchester United podcast. I've joined here with my regular co host, James, of course, from the United Muppetiers. And Phil, as always, thanks to all of you who've been downloading this podcast in its first couple of weeks. Much appreciated. And for those of you who subscribe to our YouTube channels and subscribe to our podcast platforms, the numbers on the downloads have been great. The feedback's been great. That helps me afford James's appearance fee. So how you doing, mate?
Good. Yeah. Price going up every single day for my
Hold on.
esteemed company.
The prices going up, but clothes are coming off. James, this will have to be like OnlyFans too. So you know what I mean? I just start taking the shirt off and all that.
There's been some requests. We'll see what happens. Times are hard. We'll see how work goes on that.
Don't be telling me you haven't already done that before now. No, here's the kid here. Lots to talk about as always, mate. You know, I was doing some research for this podcast, and I was reading about stories that were printed on Monday, and it felt like they were printed about 2 weeks ago.
Right.
There's so much has happened, in the short space of time since those stories were printed. Notably the Richard Arnold meeting, which we'll talk about.
Yep.
Obviously, we'll talk a little bit about last night's game against Bayern. Depends on whether you're glass half full, glass half empty type guy, on your perspective on that. Some of the Onana criticism at Hoyland, and we'll take a look at Burnley and all that there. First of all, mate, what was your take on the game last night?
So, as usual, I have maybe two different takes.
Yeah, same.
While you're watching, right? And while you're watching, you think, not so bad. And then you think after the first goal goes in, and obviously then the second within a couple minutes, from there on, I was practically tuned out, because I felt like they were tuned out. And it's a similar story in that respect to something we talked about last time, and we've talked about a few times, which is the mental weakness in the team. Something, whether it's lack of preparation, lack of determination, there's something that goes on where they just cannot handle it when something goes wrong. And I will say then that I was encouraged that rather than fading to a 7-0, and I know this is a glass half full side of it, but rather than fading further against a Bayern team that maybe slowed down a bit after that point in time, they did press a bit more back to get into it. They did put in the effort. They did put in some fight towards the end. It's not everybody on the team, I should say, but they did a fair number of them, and brought it back to at least an interesting ending to the game. And then afterwards, I spoke to a few other people who probably are smarter than myself when it comes to football and tactics and strategies and things like that. And, to give a little bit of an optimistic take on this, some of these people's perspectives were, interesting. Obviously, one, last year, Eric Ten Hag sacrificed huge on his ideals and principles for the football team in order to get results. We saw how he played in preseason, how he attempted to start the first 2 games of the year to dramatically horrid effects, even against, like Brentford. It's not a top team. You can see when it goes wrong, how wrong it can go when you're doing the type of principles that he's looking towards. But I think it's a tricky situation for a lot of fans and for a lot of people, and for the coach. It's always been this way at United. The pressure for results is there so heavily. It weighs on you every single day that it's so easy to bend on your principles and say, we've got to go back to what works. We drop our defensive line 15 yards. A lot of those goals don't happen over the last few weeks, right? A lot of the goals against United don't happen over the last few weeks. We drop that midfield line back 15. Those things don't happen. And he's not done that, not dropped those things. And the positive signals that I see and that I've had from people who talk to me tell me, look, it's not an accident. I know this is like one of the, it's almost embarrassing when you're talking about a good 20 minutes. However, controlling the game and possession, chance creation, should have scored a goal probably, Facundo Pellistri, a little bit
Yeah.
of inexperience, not attacking that ball. Should have scored. Eriksson probably should have
Eriksson
scored on the
definitely should
shot
have
he
scored.
got too. Yeah, one of them should have scored there. It's a different
Eriksson
game.
definitely.
Yeah, we've had, Pellistri is the second game starting, so I'm not going to say much about the kid. Second game starting, Bayern away, Champions League, one of the most difficult places and experiences to get into the game. But regardless, it's not an accident controlling the game, possession, chance creation for 20 minutes. Even the goal that was conceded, the first goal, huge, just an error. We'll talk about Onana, but just an error. There's nothing else to it. It's a goalkeeper error. It's not complicated. They were defending pretty well up until that point. They pointed out, look, against Arsenal, having actual possession, have not had possession against Arsenal in years. Even before Arteta, we would not have possession against Arsenal, would not control the game at all, would not be in it. And we were maybe a fractional, marginal offside calls from that game too, from having a win. Against Tottenham Hotspurs, the first half was actually a fantastic performance. We talk about Brighton, the first good 20 minutes again there, and then something happens. And there's more to that you'll probably want to talk about later.
Yeah,
even why things went to crap against Brighton, because there's a little more to it than just, players are bad or something's wrong. There's other things, there's other factors there. It's not an accident that each of these games United have been able to do something they did not factually do many times last year, which is control against good teams, top teams, have possession, create chances. Rasmus Højlund coming in, that relationship between him and Rashford will build more and more every game that they play together. We've not had a striker who is going to attack the posts, attack the box, crash it like Rasmus Højlund does in forever, since the few games that Cavani would show up under Oli, in which we actually did really well, interestingly enough. And so I take a lot of positives from it. The biggest negative and it has been a recurring thing over the last few games, the biggest reason for these goals, and it's the same thing that someone pointed out to me, is in the midfield, there's no legs. They're not tracking the runners back. They lose them, and defense gets overloaded and disorganized, and a goal happens. And it's every single goal, the same thing happens. Eriksson cannot track back his man quick enough. He can't. He physically cannot at this point in time in his career, right? That's why it's inexcusable. There's a clip, McTominay coming on in the 79th minute, not running back 10 minutes later. It's inexcusable for a player who's 25 years old, who has the legs, who has the energy, who comes on and 10 minutes into the game does not run back, because we don't have that many players who can. Bruno got back from right wing 90 minutes into the game to make a tackle on that sequence from 20 yards behind McTominay, caught up and got in there to make the defending. Casemiro has been having a very slow start in that regard. Even with scoring the 2 goals, he was pretty bad before that. And I think it's a huge miss on a player like Mason Mount, who does give you that energy, that tracking, that running. And that's the biggest thing that's been said to me is, the lack of pace. When you have Lindelof and Lissandro in the back line, they're slow. They're both pretty slow. Varane being out is a problem, Mount being out is a problem. So it's a little bit of positives and negatives, but that's kind of how I see it, what I can take away from it.
I remember when Liverpool played Real Madrid last season. Liverpool were 2-0 up against Real Madrid in the first 20 minutes or so. And included in that 2-0 lead was a major mistake from Courtois. Alisson made a mistake too in that game. But I remember one of the things Jurgen Klopp said after the game was one of the things that stood out for him against Real Madrid was how resilient they are, how they don't lose confidence, how they still believe they'll win a game from 2-0 down. And things like goalkeeping mistakes can happen. But you can't fall apart. And I'll tell you a couple of things that I saw. The Wolves game, the result was an imposter, as Zabi says. And I can still man an argument both ways here, where you can take some positives from last night. But I'll tell you something, at 3-1, Bayern were strolling through that game. They were
Yep.
taking players off. They were, okay, we'll save our energy. They'd hit the post. I felt that 3-1, United had accepted defeat and that Bayern had accepted they were going to stroll through the game. I think that United were probably as surprised as anyone that they get back to 3-2, because it wasn't as a result of attacking intent. It wasn't the result of players desperately, trying to get back into that game, players trying to impose themselves. It was primarily came part from a mistake from Bayern, and Casemiro punished them. But as soon as United scored, Bayern up the other end of the field and scored. Now, they did that against Arsenal, right? Where as soon as they scored, Arsenal up the other end of the field and scored, right? No tackle on the ball, no nothing.
Yeah.
As soon as Bayern needed to score, they did, right? Same thing, wide open at the back, too much space between the fullbacks and the centre-backs. Runners weren't coming through midfield, and half-hearted pressing, half-hearted defending, basics, right? Be organised, keep it tight, don't give anything away. And when I'm watching United, I see, I'm seeing Scott McTominay. And Scott McTominay, this is why you can't keep players that you want to get rid of, right? Because basically what you're saying to Scott McTominay is, we wanted rid of you, but the reason why you're here is because we couldn't afford your replacement, and I go in there and play and give me 100%. Clearly, leading up to the Spurs game, United played Everton in a behind closed doors game. And McTominay was the best player on the pitch, I was told. He was immaculate. And of course, he's left out. I knew there was a number of times during that game where the camera panned to McTominay's face. And he looked extremely angry, right? I'm sure, Bayern Munich being interested in him probably looked at that game last night going, I wish I was on the other team, right? He doesn't look like a player that's completely committed. United didn't look like a team that ever believed they were ever going to get back into that game once they conceded the first goal. One of the things that's quite concerning is Marcus Rashford playing like this is above him, or he's above this, right? That this is all beneath him. And as soon as United go behind, his body language and attitude's appalling. He's very good on the ball, but we talked about Cristiano Ronaldo not being a pressing monster. Well, nor is Marcus Rashford. And when you heard about Ten Hag saying, against Spurs, against the defense, wasn't the midfield, it started from the front line, right? I think Rashford probably didn't appreciate that. And I think he was talking about Rashford, where they weren't pressing properly. We saw the goals against Brighton, which quite frankly is a disgrace, a total and absolute disgrace. How limpless wristed United were in their pressing, the intent. And so what starts to happen when you go behind and players stop believing they can win is they stop doing the things they don't want to do. Players don't like defending, right? Especially forwards, right? So you have to be really committed to want to do that. You have to be committed to getting the result. You have to feel like, if I don't do this, there's major consequences. Marcus Rashford's in this position in his United career where he's essentially undroppable, right? Because United just don't have the depth to do anything with him. So regardless of how he plays, he's going to play next week. This is not a good position for any footballer to be in, right? And undoubtedly he's exceptional on the ball, but he has a look to me, and he's had it pretty much since Spurs, that this is all beneath him. That you look at the Gabby Jesus goal against Arsenal, and Rashford's attempted press during that break was dreadful, absolutely dreadful. And I think this is a big problem for Ten Hag, of getting these players to believe that they can be successful, that they can compete with the Bayern Munichs and everything else. See, you brought up something there that was interesting. There's a refusal for United to acknowledge where they're actually at, right? So they're always trying to shortcut back to the top. I was talking to Stevie Nicol for about an hour and a half on Tuesday. We were talking about this. We were talking about how Liverpool's history was an albatross because you were constantly being held. And once Douglas left after Hillsborough happened, Liverpool Football Club went downhill. But the history haunts the present because you're constantly being held to those standards, and the reality is the players that you have are not the same as the players.
Yep.
And it's very, very difficult to recreate greatness because there are certain, characteristics of greatness that are very difficult to replicate. Quality, everything. Football has cycles, and that's the way it goes. But United are always trying to shortcut. They're always thinking we can go out and buy 2 or 3 good players, and then we'll catch City and we'll catch Liverpool.
Yep.
But if you look at someone like Brighton, they build incrementally on top of good foundations. United's foundations are always wafer thin. So all it takes is a couple of defeats for the whole balloon to become deflated, and to show that this is skin deep, that this is superficial growth. And so United are patient about their growth and say, look, we're not going to catch City for another year or two. Okay. And that's assuming we do everything right. I heard Paul Scholes talk about this last night. United didn't really improve the team. They strengthened the squad, which I would agree with over the summer. Harry Kane played for Bayern Munich last night because they're a top football club that can sign top players. Harry Kane wasn't playing for Manchester United last night because United no longer can do that. United now have to spread out that budget across 3 or 4 players that the world's best football clubs spend on one. Right? I mean, there was a story United bid 50 million for Evan Ferguson. What an insult! What a total insult! Right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is ridiculous. Totally ridiculous. The reality is United don't have the budget anymore to bring the players in of the requisite level to catch City, to catch Liverpool. They are exactly where Arsenal were under Wenger. Right? They are a club that's really trying to finish top 4. That are going. The best players want to leave. Right? They want to go to other clubs. They can't when they're in the market for better players. Top clubs will pick them off. United can't, and they're getting that second tier, third tier player that I mean, you can touch on this in a minute about Amrabat. We'll get to that about some of the recruitment, the perception of recruitment on him. Maybe that's why they want the break clauses in there, but. To me, again, it speaks to a dysfunctional football club because it shouldn't be signed if that's the case. And I look at this and thinking, this is a football club that has some good players, not enough good players, and the weight of history, which demands that they compete for the Premier Leagues and European Cups, is a big problem for United because what they have on the pitch is nowhere near that level where they can compete. Ten Hag's been unlucky with injuries, there's no doubt. We can get into that. But even with the full squad, I mean, you look at. I hate to say it, but you look at City. I mean, they're just so far ahead of United. It's unbelievable. I mean, their signings come in, settle right away, score goals. Good, Hoyland's done really well, to be fair to the kid. But everything looks like it's been properly planned out. Where United just look like. They're throwing a jigsaw together and hoping the pieces fit. And that chaos shows up on the pitch every week. So a top club will always beat United. And yesterday in that game against Bayern, we're sitting here going 4-3 is not a bad result. On the face of it, it's not, right? It's not a bad result going away to Bayern. There's no disgrace in losing 4-3 to a team that haven't lost at home in something like 7 years in the Champions League. But if you look underneath it, how long we needed in that game last night, right? First 20 minutes, as usual, same thing. They start well, they don't score, they concede a really bad goal, and then they fall apart. So other than really the last couple of minutes, you had to work in the game. Did I lose you? I think you froze you. I'll get you back in a second, mate. I just lost James. Some technical problems there, so we'll get it back in just a second. But there he is. But yeah, look, other than the last few minutes, United weren't in that game, and that was the reality of it. I thought United were, of course, again, lost there for a minute. I thought United again were a bit unlucky with the penalty decision last night.
Yeah.
Definitely could have gone either way. And when you look at some of the decisions United have been given against in Europe, you look at the Lisandro Martinez's penalty against Real Sociedad last season. You look at the Betis handballs, Jose Perez. I mean, I sometimes wish that Wolves penalty had been given because the penance for that has been unbelievable.
I know, right? It was like the non-offside against City, like we paid last year in the win against them. We paid for that goal for like 2 months after that, in terms of bad calls the other way and the constant attention in the media for it. It was crazy.
Well, I mean, just on the Garnacho thing, it's easy for people to turn around and say, well, he's offside. But people forget a day before that, Manuel Akanji's a mile offside too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was given, and that went in City's favour. Right.
Yeah.
By the way, so why shouldn't Ten Hag be turning around and saying, why are we getting the benefit of the doubt here? Because you could
I know.
camera angle where he's maybe not offside.
And I thought they were going to give you the benefit of the doubt a little bit this year. That was something, one of the focus, right? Like if it's those millimeter marginal calls where those lines are touching basically on that thing, they're just going to give it because it's like it's close enough. And I thought that was the case. There was a few games on the first opening weekend that were like that, where the offsides were quickly checked. They looked like they would be offsides they would have called last year, and they let them go. So I agree. I mean, it's kind of like the calls. There has been a difficulty in officiating, and we can't claim that is the only thing. But my two biggest concerns, and I'll get to the second one in a minute, and we can talk about it more, and then there'll be something else. My two biggest concerns are, number one, that mentality factor, because I do think they actually played pretty well. There was good things. There's good things happening. There's players who do well, but it permeates the entire squad, this mentality problem. As soon as something bad happens, heads drop. And it's obviously more noticeable in certain areas, like when you look up front. Part of the strategy, of course, has still been in transition. Rashford sprinting into the channels, forward, sprint. And there was a stat, and it's one of the things I challenge a little bit on this, is that I know when people watch Arsenal, they'll see someone like Martinelli sprinting back in defense, right? I know they see that. At the same time, yeah, that's what you don't want to do. So when you say when the attitude is bad, or when things are going wrong, players drop out doing the things they don't want to do. At the same time, it costs the same amount of energy to sprint forward as it does backwards. And one of the problems that we've had, and this has been a problem for years and years, actually, because it happens to every one of our wingers over time, is we get these complaints because we've been stuck in a bit of a transitional style. And this is where it comes down to this trying to short circuit the results, because this is how we played last year, right? We went back to deep defending, long transitions. Marcus Rashford made more sprints than anyone on the team by some significant margin last season. Forward. I mean, but these are sprints for the whole game, right? But most of them are forward in attack. And it happens to all our wingers. What's the problem with Anthony when he plays most of the time is because we're usually playing in transition, he runs back on defense. He won't sprint forward. So he has the opposite problem. He slows every attack way down because he whatever it's legs or something, he looks slow when he's attacking, doesn't get by players. But it is a part of cheating, to try to get a result instead of implement a style to get a way of playing. Arsenal attackers can walk half the game if they want to, because they're sitting camped around that box, moving, jogging, running, holding possession, one sprint back for defense every 10 minutes. Same with City. It's one of the dominant things that they've done. And that's something that United need to improve on. Having to track back constantly the wingers because we play this up and down style. It is a reason for difficulty. It's a reason for a look of a lack of fitness. It's a reason for a lot of things. And it's something we have to move away from if we want to be consistently successful, and something that, we will under Ten Hag. But the mentality thing is certainly there. We even saw in years past under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, we'd go behind and catch up and win. It happened all the time. There's something mentally they need to get right in terms of their consistency, in terms of belief. And some of it is they're going to have to get some results to get that belief back.
Mhm.
You know, it's like a chicken or the egg situation here because something goes wrong, heads drop, but you need to get that result to bring that belief back to the team.
But this is
And
where you
that
need
is,
leadership, man. This is where you
yeah,
really need leadership. This is
well,
where I think Bruno has got to
I
lead
know,
better,
I
and
know,
Casemiro's got to lead better to bring that
yeah,
composure to a team. To
I
say
know,
don't panic when you go behind. But the problem for me when I look at Casemiro is he looks like one of the first ones to
I
drop his head
know,
and
I
go,
know, I know.
I mean, almost in a
That's,
Rashford type style.
I know that's probably the most worrisome player that I see there because we signed him on a short term because he was supposed to solve these problems. We know he's not going to have many years, but if it's only a year that we've got, you know, yeah, we spoke about on the first podcast how, you know, I know they're looking at a replacement already, and that's fair enough. But we got to make it through the season somehow successfully. And he's one that's got to turn it around. And you know, mentality wise, you'd hope he'd be one of the ones that doesn't have that issue, but we'll see. You know, in terms of the injuries and the fitness, it's an interesting thing because, you know, there's a perspective that, you know, players are not fit because they're not working hard or something like that, and you
What do you
wonder, it
hear
doesn't
on
really
that?
make any sense.
Tell me what you
Yeah,
hear about that because we talked about this earlier in the week.
yeah. So you know what I've heard is actually quite a bit different to that overall, and it's interesting because United are not the only club in this situation right now. The crisis looks a little bit worse, but Chelsea have quite an injury problem on their hands too. And there's two things that are going on here. And one of the things I heard, and then we'll talk about the Brighton thing because there's another aspect to this as well. But I heard from someone very well informed on this, so I'm quite certain of it. Brighton do very, very little running work during the week. Brighton are a team that do very, very little running work during the week. They do almost tactics all week. It's all tactical work. One of the advantages that obviously teams like that have, Brighton, who have built a very good team that now are on the cusp of Europe and all of that, but they still have not had to play in Europe. You see, so they're used to, as a team, having the whole week empty, one game a week. The fitness levels are a bit different there because when you're playing one game a week, you can look fresher than your opponent when you're not fitter than them because they've been playing two a week for weeks and weeks and months and months and months. And we know that United have had an extremely busy schedule last few years. But what's happened essentially is really that in training, United are working almost too hard, funnily enough, at the moment when it comes to actual running, that they've been running almost too much. And the same goes for Chelsea, is one of the things that's going on there. And Pochettino is kind of famous for that when he came into Southampton as well as to Tottenham, that his biggest principle when he comes to a side is to make them run insane amounts to get them the fittest team in the league. And then usually they are eventually, but you suffer in the beginning. And I think United are also going through a bit of that too, that they are under Ten Hag here. You know, they know they have to be fit for 2 games a week. Right now, Brighton don't. But there's even a view from the same person that they will struggle, Brighton, when they start playing in Europe now because they will not have the fitness levels to cope with 2 games a week, where you sometimes do have to conserve a little bit for the next game, and you're not fresh every single game off a week's rest and all of that. So United are suffering a bit now, and it may be that there's some issues, some things that need to be improved in terms of the way that the load is managed in training, the way that it's assessed, because maybe it's a little bit too much right now. But the hope is that it'll pay dividends in the long run as well.
You know, to me, there's a few things that are unforgivable as a professional.
Yeah.
And fitness is one of them.
Yeah.
And not knowing how to get your athletes appropriately fit
Yeah.
to have a proper balance is unforgivable because it's
Yeah.
not a particularly complex issue.
Yeah.
Right. The sports science on this is relatively clear. They have analytical data. I mean, these guys are wearing stuff on their boots. Almost to an atomic degree where they're really taking human agency and variables out of it to where they're tracked to the umpteenth degree. Here's what I would say on this, because at times in the past I've heard the opposite, right? So when Solskjaer came in, one of the first things that he said was these players aren't fit.
Yeah.
And I think about this.
Mm-hmm.
Solskjaer came in December. Mourinho was sacked, I think it was like December, but after the Liverpool game, they had lost 4-0.
Yep.
So that's smack bang in the middle of the season. And Solskjaer saying, I want my team to be the fittest in the league, and they're
Yeah.
not fit, right? Big problem, right? Mourinho complained about the fitness
Mm-hmm.
when he arrived.
Yep.
Complained about the fact that towards the end of the season he was starting to have to pick certain games because the squad. I mean, I thought that was also a shot at the board, wasn't big enough to deal with the demands that was put on them. Ranić comes in and talks about two things. One, the players are now going to have to rehabilitate their injuries at the club, right,
Mm-hmm.
rather than taking off somewhere else. And two, um, complained about the fact that despite United weren't playing the same amount of games as Liverpool and their rivals, they were still picking up a lot more non-contact injuries,
Yep.
right? Some of that, of course, is a high-intensity press type style, heavy
Mm-hmm.
metal football, if you want to call it that. It's very, very physically taxing on players. You
Mm-hmm.
have to be unbelievably fit, and it burns squads out quickly. Right, so you
Yep.
have to, Guardiola is very good in how he rotates players in. How make sure you 2-3 years you're gone, 2-3 years you're gone.
Yep.
That's usually a shelf life on a high press team when you're in that 28 to 32 range. So I think I remember when Lukaku went to Italy, Conte said it took him, I don't know, 3-4 months to get him properly fit because he wasn't fit from his time at
Mm-hmm.
United. When Ten Hag was turning around saying after the Spurs game that didn't work hard enough, when you have to remind your team to work hard, that's a major concern to me because that's something that should go without saying. And when I see United come out against Bayern Munich 5 minutes early from half time, I'm like, what possibly could Ten Hag have needed to remind them of that wasn't important before the game? Like, what are you responding to? What do you have said? You need to come out here and give 100%. You need to do this, do this, do this. Unless it's a serious tactical adjustment, talking about the intangibles of fitness, commitment, all that stuff that it doesn't matter whether you're a Burnley or a Manchester United or these are things that all athletes should have at this highest level. There can be variables with skill, there can be variables with talent and everything else, but there cannot be variables on things like fitness because that is the bare minimum to me.
Yeah, I would agree. And part of it is, unfortunately, it comes back to, Jose Mourinho complained about obviously the fitness and all that. But the other thing he complained about was the lack of the data at the club on this, that their sports science department, and this is not a new thing. United's analytics and sports science department are way behind, and they've been doing work on it to catch up, but it is way behind. It's way behind. And I think we see the effects of that, of not having the years of historical data to track, to put together, and to run in terms of, great, this is the ideal. This is how this player functions. This is what they need. This is all of that, because these are the details that are worked out to the nth degree at clubs like Manchester City, where with each player, they know exactly how much they need, what they should do, their routine, the best, everything is worked out to the highest level. And I think we're kind of at the moment, a positive take on it is we're suffering from putting this in place and trying to get them more fit than we ever have been. Part of the problem is that they're not getting more fit when they're injured. So if it's going to a point where they're picking up too many injuries, it's not going to help. When I look at players like Aaron Wan-Bissaka, I know Aaron Wan-Bissaka is a consummate professional in terms of how he trains, in terms of his effort, in terms of his intensity, things like that. I know he's never been a player to stop. He's rarely had injuries. I think one of his only injuries he had was actually a contact injury from sliding into the boards under Rangnick off the pitch. And I know that is something that has to be worked out. And my hope is that this is more of growing pains at the moment, that it's from really hard work on this, that Varane, Mount coming in, back in the next few weeks, Kavi Manu coming in, that they'll be better for it moving forward, that the rest of the players who are continuing to train and work under this and not injured are going to continue to improve. in this vein in terms of fitness. But honestly, I would say that by middle of next month, the league isn't won in October and September. We know that, but you can lose it. And part of that is that, I think by end of October is usually when you expect the team to really start into the form that they're going to carry in through the year. And that comes down to fitness for me too. You're starting to get the midweek games. We've got Champions League, League Cup, Champions League. These midweek games are coming. We've got that run to the November international break. It is during this period of time that we need to see these injuries subside, the players return from them, not be recurring, and the fitness levels to improve. And if they do not, then there's going to be serious inquisition that needs to then be done at that point in time to what's going on, because it is ridiculous. And it's one thing you cannot put on individual players when it's happening across the board, where you cannot say it's that player's fault, that they're injured or not fit. When everybody was healthy and you had one person like Anthony Martial who just couldn't stay fit no matter what, you have a different question to be asking. But when it's everybody and it keeps happening over and over, it's different. So, based on this, I'm hoping it's a bit of the same growing pains and suffering on improvements, but I think we'll find out in the next few weeks.
Well, I want to tell you something. Ten Hag's remit this season was to improve. And when you look at the stats, they're appalling. So of United have conceded 18 goals in all competitions. That's the most of any Premier League team. Now, admittedly, they've played some more games than some other Premier League teams. They've conceded 14 goals. That is absolutely disgraceful, right? I mean, we conceding 3 and 4 goals. They've conceded 3 away at Arsenal, 4 away to Bayern Munich. Anytime, this is what one of the things that Ten Hag really had to fix this season was going away to difficult games and being competitive. They've lost 18 of their last 35 away. The only other ever-present Premier League team to do that, to do worse, is West Ham. That's appalling, absolutely pathetic. Like that, and when I look at all the other concerning, with Onana, so last night was the first goal I could really blame Onana 100% on. Right? He also wasn't bought to play in front of a back four of Reguilon, Dalot, Lindelof, and Martinez, right? To be fair to Reguilon, the guy's come in, he's shown tremendous attitude. He shows like he really wants to be there. He wants to make it a permanent move. And, I think he's done really well in the 2 games that he's played. But, there's no goalkeeper you can buy that doesn't make a mistake. It's fine, that happens. I have no problems with him not making a mistake. And I still think, even at this point, I wouldn't swap him for David De Gea.
And I think he's faced very much near the top of the list in terms of shots on the year so far.
Yeah, look, but this is the thing, like you can attack as an individual, but you can't defend as one. Otherwise you're going to get tore apart. And when you can see where United are getting targeted in midfield, because you can't play Eriksen and Casemiro in the same midfield. Christian Eriksen
doesn't work anymore.
Last night. Christian Eriksen, this should be his last year at United. Christian Eriksen's great in the League Cup games, or bringing them on the last 20 minutes in a game you're 2-0 up, or the last 2 games of a Champions League group stage where they're dead rubbers, where you can rest players, where you can put them on the League Cup, you can bring them on FA Cup, but you can't play them in key games, right? Where you're expecting 90 minutes of legs for him against top teams. You're just going to overrun him, right? Especially playing beside Casemiro. It's not fair on either of them, really, right? And I understand that they've had injuries in midfield, but and I believe that once Mount comes back, if he can stay fit, remember he only played 9 games last season too, then obviously he'll be an upgrade on Christian Eriksen beside Casemiro, but still leaves the problem of where you play him. Do you play him high and leave Casemiro exposed? I don't know. But when I look at some of those metrics, some of those stats, and I don't want to do it all on stats, you look at the fact that it's its worst ever starts of Premier League season. James, those are really concerning stats. And United have had a somewhat, have had an above average difficult start, but not an impossible start. We really could easily be sitting here with United not winning a game all season, because the 2 games they did win, 1, the Wolves game, they did not deserve to win, and 2, that Forest game, they really easily could have lost that.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. It's concerning. I mean, it is. It's like, it is concerning, and the only thing I could point towards, because right now I feel, I've been so down in the dumps with a lot of the United stuff over the last month with everything that's happened. It's been hard. I mean, it's been hard, right? You take the Greenwood situation, the Anthony situation, Sancho situation, the results, the start, the difficulties. It's hard to be positive about it. And so I started looking at it and saying, all right, well, I'm not going to be delusionally positive about this.
I know exactly where you're going.
But I'm going to sit here and say, it's like, let's take, I'm almost looking at it like it's a free hit right now. Okay. One of the benefits I'll give to Arsenal and Arteta, they didn't qualify for Champions League before last season, right? Before this season. And they challenged for the league last year.
Yeah,
they weren't in the Champions League. They were in Europe, the Europa, and they weren't even in Europe the year before that, right? They didn't, they suffered a bit for that. I give some comparisons to Jurgen Klopp and Liverpool too. I've talked about them a fair bit because I think there's some decent comparisons there. They, like you mentioned, they were hung with this albatross of the past where they were trying to cheat to get results for a long period of time, right? Buying old players. Their squad was old. It was it was established. But it wasn't good. And they would struggle and they would hang about, in 4th to 8th, right, for a long time. I think they won a Champions League during that time, during one of these times here, even. But they long time ago. But they struggled. And one of the things that happened before they brought Virgil van Dijk in under Klopp is they you almost looked at it like a free hit that season. I remember it the season before and the half season leading up to that. They just started attacking like mad and they just went for it and they would score goals. They started scoring goals and they started conceding goals left and right. I mean, they were scoring and conceding every week, late goals, blunders, errors, doesn't matter. They just kind of went for it and put their style into place. And when they settled that defense with Virgil van Dijk and Alisson and all of that, and they settled it, the next 2 years, they were one of the best teams in Europe, competing with City that nobody else could do. Obviously, winning the league, winning Champions League. They did it. They pulled it off. And they burnt out pretty quick after that. And you can see, though, what happened when Virgil van Dijk got injured. That one player getting injured in their back line, they had a terrible season for their standards, right? And there's interesting comparisons there because they don't have the resources that Manchester City has either. And they've been able to kind of rebuild it. They're looking like they're going to be pretty good again this year. And that's kind of the positive I would give it is I would almost look at this season like like you said, we have to stop. We've been talking about, we have to stop to some degree trying to shortcut the result to win and put in what we're trying to do and just see how it goes. Honestly, we just have to. And that's kind of where I'm at on it. It's been so negative that I'm just like,
I know.
Just go for it. Just go for how you want to play. Just do it. And let's see if it works. Let's give it till December. You know what I mean? Before we panic about how we're playing. It's like, forget it. You know what I mean? We can make up the points to get top 5. Because remember, it's going to be top 5 moving forward on Champions League, right? Gives you a little more wiggle room. Let's see how it goes. We can make up the points between December and the end of the season if we need to, if we can get the players healthy and a style implemented and have things working. And that's kind of what I'm hoping for at this point from the season,
And I have to say, Ten Hag's been getting some criticism, and I don't really understand how people don't learn. I mean, everyone has their own opinion on this. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve criticism or is above criticism. No one's perfect. But of all the problems that exist at United and all the reasons why they're in this, I mean, was this not made clear in Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's interview the other day with Andy Mitten, that the manager, rarely do they follow his advice on what they actually need to do. You can go to the club with recommendations and they come back and knock them down and say, no, you're not getting that guy. We'll go. Harry Kane's a perfect example. Bayern Munich get Harry Kane, United don't. Borussia Dortmund get Jude Bellingham, United don't. Borussia Dortmund get Erling Haaland, United don't. These decisions have consequences, you know. So United end up getting Odion Gallo, you know. I mean, I'm sorry, but I don't care how good a manager you are. Again, the weight of the United's history, you know, holds them a prisoner in the present, because they're constantly compared with that. But where the football club are at presently, you know, they're not operating like a top football club because they can't.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Declan Rice should have been signed by Manchester United and would have been signed in previous years, but United couldn't either afford it. They couldn't afford Harry Kane. They can't afford the top players that will make the difference between being a team that toggles between 5th, 4th, 3rd, you know, 6th, 7th, and a team that actually challenges. You know, so City wanted Harry Kane. They had no problems meeting the buyer. You know, what Spurs were asking, but they didn't get him. And I felt that United should have made that signing over the summer. I want to ask you a couple of other questions. The Richard Arnold meeting. So, of course, he had this Zoom meeting where you could anonymously submit questions to Richard Arnold, and he gave a relatively mealy-mouthed, you know, non-committal reply to 2 questions. You know, one, I thought, you know, with the Mason Greenwood situation, we don't expect, which of course is not an answer. You know, well, it doesn't matter what you expect. You know, there was no denial that Mason Greenwood could play for Manchester United again. There was nothing. There is no unequivocal statement. You know, leaving that down to, you know, an expectation is, you know, really is an indication that he doesn't want his work to come back to haunt him if Mason Greenwood does come back. And 2, you know, essentially word salad nonsense about, you know, hang tight, be resilient over the takeover, you know, where this is a strategic review and we're talking big numbers, all this stuff, when everybody and their dog knows the reason why we're still in this process is because the Glazers haven't been given a price that they feel they want to sell at. Whether I think that they, you know, we've seen Bloomberg talk about this. I still think it would be really difficult for them to not do anything.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, you've seen a few reports this week, kind of all of this coming on the back of what we heard last week about there being more recent discussions on a takeover from the side that we are hearing it. And I think it was interesting because there's an article from the Times on this and Mike Keegan as well about, you know, the buyers being put off a little bit by the start of the season. And I don't mind hearing something like that because the positives of an article like that are telling you, if that was a transfer, what would you think? That article comes out. You know, they're put off on the price a little bit. They don't think they want to pay more. Player, you know, only has a couple of years of playing history, isn't all of that. It's a negotiating tactic. It's a bit of the public games. It tells you that talks are ongoing. And pretty simply, I see it as a pushback on the requests the Glazers are making, which are for 2 things that we've talked about. Number 1 is just more money, or number 2 is more influence, to retain some influence in the club. We talked about how the Ineos and Jim Ratcliffe are not willing to do that. And it's one of the things they will not do.
But just to interrupt you, why in the fucking God's earth would they feel it's a smart decision for Manchester United for them to have influence, given the absolute state of this football club? How on earth could you sit there, right, and say, my level of competence entitles me to a say on how this football club is run? You are the reason why this football club is on its knees. On what professional capacity do you have anything to contribute of value?
Yeah, well, here's the problem, right, Phil? And this is the issue with people who are successful. And I use successful as almost a pejorative word here because they're not successful.
Yes.
A lot of people who are successful do not understand why they've been successful, or they ignore it. And they look at the club that they purchased for 400 million and they say this club has gone 15 times its value under our ownership. What do you mean the club's on its knees? They've 15 times the value of their asset. They've made a lot of money. They're successful by the measure of a business, by the measure of their ownership, by the measure of what they're going to get out of it. They're very successful owners. by the measure of a football club, it's an abject failure. They've overseen a collapse. If you look at the chart of the club's value as opposed to the chart of the club's trophies, it's in the exact opposite. And that is, at the end of the day, the reason they're not smart people in this respect, in that it takes a degree of self-introspection that billionaires often do not have. And especially ones who come from money that isn't their own, that did not build something on their own, to look at something and say, it grew because the industry grew. It grew because the environment grew. And if anything, we held it down from what it could have been. What it could have been without them. And they won't look at that. They won't see it. They do not see it.
One thing I have to give really begrudging credit for is their ability, their Teflon. On every single TV channel, you've got every journalist, every ex-Man-United player slaughtering them.
Yeah.
They have to go. And they can ignore that. Right? And still sit down with sponsors and convince them that it's a smart partnership. And I'm going, how is it that they can silence all this criticism, all these protests, and not as a human being, feel some sense of obligation, saying, the empathetic human being in me realizes we're doing harm here. Let's just sell this club and move on. How is it that they are so Teflon that they can insulate themselves from all that criticism? Right? It doesn't. You can go after the front. It doesn't matter. And their steadfast adherence to self-enrichment beyond any insult, to transcend any criticism, is really astonishing to me. I mean, it's quite incredible how they have this level, I don't want to say inhumanity, but how they just don't seem to be triggered the way a normal human being would.
Well, let's bring this to a more a realistic term and talk about a few real things to wrap this up on that, on some examples of this, because the Ole Gunnar Solskjaer interview is quite interesting. You and I have spoken about this. I've put some of this stuff out publicly about some of the things that happened under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer in that COVID summer to do with Joel Glazer and his decision-making process. Yes. And it was real interesting. I pointed this out because it's what sticks for me and sticks to the end of time with Manchester United, was that the article that came out says Joel Glazer and Richard Arnold decided that Harry Kane was not a good use of funds. Now, here's the thing. Why? Well, is that, whether it's even right or wrong, it doesn't matter. Why is Joel Glazer deciding anything when it comes to football?
What he's saying there, James, right?
Yeah.
And this is exactly the same mentality as what cost them Holland. They're already thinking about the sale of that player before the purchase.
The residual value,
so
the later.
How much can I sell this guy for? Not what value does he bring to the team right away in terms of, this guy comes in, scores 300 goals, we win a Premier League, we win this. They don't care about that.
Yeah.
No. What is my potential to recoup the sale? And by the way, they can't sell anyone for a profit. But this sickness, this mentality of how do we go after players that we can, this is really partly a consequence of the whole Ronaldo the original Ronaldo sale where they, wow, so we can buy a player for, 13 million and sell him for 80. We want to repeat that. Right, buy, resell. So then they started bringing in, we need to look at players 23 and under. We need to do all this, because they like the idea. This is why you don't get investment in non-sexy things like the analytical department, because where's the resale value on that? I can't market that to sponsors. Players, we can market, sponsors, we can sell. So I don't want to hijack it, but this is the mentality. Everything is a business decision. It's not a football decision.
Exactly. But this is where I want to bring it back to the recruitment as a whole, because, there was one of the stories that I think is worth mentioning. And this is something I discussed. We mentioned at the start of the podcast. I got a couple of minutes, so we'll get through this, this section to wrap it up. I said something about Amrabat, how the recruitment department weren't in love with Amrabat and have some doubts about him. He's someone that Erik ten Hag really wanted through the summer. And then you had this story about concerns about how involved Kees Vos is from SEG, Erik ten Hag's agency, the one that he's not employed by, but is a client of, right? In their summer dealings and things like that. And here's the thing about it that it all comes back to. One problem we have at the moment in recruitment, because there's a couple of views on recruitment, and it's gone different ways over time. One is that, a proper recruitment team doesn't just let the manager pick the targets. Okay, they don't do it that way. They support the manager by building a proper football department and a proper football team, top down. That there's a philosophy, that there's an idea, that when Jurgen Klopp is asking for Julian Brandt, that Edwards says to him, "No, hold on, I've got someone better for you. It's going to work better. I know exactly what you need, and I'm going to get you the right person." So they signed Mo Salah, and look at that, one of the greatest now players in history of the Premier League having come in, in terms of numbers and all that. It's been, you get the same decisions at City. Their department is top of the line. Whoever Pep Guardiola wants, it's not really of consequence. It's not to say he's ignored, because he's not. He's a strong voice in a group, but he trusts that the people above him are going to identify the right people and bring them in, right? And get him what he needs to win. And that's how it goes at Liverpool, and that's how it goes at Arsenal as well, that there's a lot of support from on high. That's what has been helping Arteta a lot out, is from on high, building the team and putting it together, because there's a philosophy from above. We have a few problems here, which is that, one, there isn't a philosophy from above. It's always manager by manager philosophy, right? So you go from Jose Mourinho to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer to Erik ten Hag, three managers who could not be more different. And so the players they signed could not be more different. So you have no consistent philosophy in terms of recruitment throughout the club. So then you try to overcorrect it a little bit by getting Erik ten Hag players he's familiar with to implement his style and put his thing into play. But that's not actually the reason why that's happening. And there's probably, here's the thing, I could criticize Erik ten Hag's eye for talent and targets. I don't think it's that good personally, but it doesn't matter. It actually doesn't matter, because the reason it's happening is Erik ten Hag is a shield for the Glazers and the club. We've spoken to people. We know how things work at United. Erik ten Hag is a shield. Everything that goes out will be centered around, it's what Erik ten Hag wanted. It was his call. It was his decision. It was his this and his that. It shields United from criticism. It shields United from failure, because Erik ten Hag is popular. He's well liked. He's got a lot of support. He's got a lot of backing. If he wants something and he decides something, most fans will agree. He's got the most fan equity at the club at the moment. He had it even before he came in, right? And so people get wrapped up in that. I'm not blaming the fans either here. It's totally fine. But proper support of Erik ten Hag would be saying, look, we'll get you what you need. Now, why did Sofian Amrabat come in, even though United recruitment were not to 100% on him? And I know they weren't. They had other targets that they were much more interested in. There was no money, right? There was no money for those targets. And that's why Sofian Amrabat comes in. That doesn't mean there's a big infight between scouts and Erik ten Hag or something like that. That's not really how it is. It's not like they would have said, no, we cannot sign him, and they signed him anyways. It's a matter of there was no money. And that's why it took to the final day and all this complications over deals and all that. If they had the money, we know there was players they're looking at, like Onana at Everton. We know there's players they're already looking at for replacing Casemiro in the future. We know there's players they're looking at to replace Jadon Sancho. We know that all of that is supposed to be being done, but it cannot be done until the money is there. And at the same time, I know that the recruitment side of things, that other people are working on targets for the wings, targets for the midfield, targets for the center backs that need replacing. But the two biggest factors that are coming into play, whether this is successful or not and whether it works out in the end, are, number one, if the money will be made available by ownership to do enough of what is needed. And that includes letting players go and signing their replacement and putting up the cash for it. And number two, that they don't simply use Erik ten Hag as a shield for the club, that they look at it and say, we need a structure that supports him, even if it's not, this is an Erik ten Hag player. It's a player that the structure supports, that fits the philosophy, and will give him the best chance of success. Because otherwise he is being set up for failure by being asked to be the head coach, the manager, the fitness coach, the sports science department, the analytics, the scout. He cannot be all of that. There is no modern day manager that does all of that for a club. There's none. And he needs the setup behind him.
And you're dealing with owners that are essentially on a month-to-month lease right now.
Yeah.
That aren't making any long-term commitments to the football club. Their recruitment department, and they've been told this for a decade. What surprises me about United always find things to be surprising that are blatantly obvious. They've been told for a decade that the recruitment department's a total disgrace. The agents know this. Everybody knows this. Everybody knows there's no coherent strategy behind anything that they do, and that they're, scouting players that they buy are very rarely done as a result of forensic analysis and making sure they fit a particular style. It's when agent rings, he'll do. Yeah, he's a bit good. We could sell him. We could develop him, all that. Right? They fit football manager ideas of what a decent player is, and then they're left with no money at the end of windows to scrape together a Cavani loan deal, free transfer type deal to paper over the cracks and hope that they've got enough for it. It's not good enough.
And to separate that out clearly, broad strokes football recruitment department, there's hundreds of people in it. There's a lot of them that know what they're doing. When it all coalesces, that it's that final point that it goes to the CEO, Joel Glazer, to be making the decisions and making the assessments of these things. The players they've rejected over the last few years that they chose not to sign
embarrassment
would build a Premier League winning team.
This is what happens
crazy
when the people that are responsible for executing on these decisions have no idea what they're doing.
But
what did we hear last week? The commercial department has the best in class. You only need to, when you look at a company's priorities, right, then that's their definition of success. We don't want to beat this dead horse. We've talked about this so many times. But United aren't really trying to be the best team in the Premier League. They aren't really trying to be the best team in Europe. In fact, what they tried to do was to take merit out of the equation to get a close Super League. So there was no responsibility put upon them to actually be very, very good on the field that had a relationship to the revenue. So they wanted to get United into a league where there was no responsibility to be competitive, but they would still get paid. And so they're not really trying to be, to catch Manchester City on the pitch. As long as they, making money off it, everything else is palatable.
I forgot my original point, but I just wanted to make it real quick before we wrap it up. That Joel Glazer spent all these years thinking he knows best when it comes to making decisions on players. And that just tells you the attitude, the mindset that someone has where they cannot perceive the failures that they're making.
Yeah, no, I know.
And that's when you're asking, why can't they see all this criticism about the club and just sell? Just let it go. The mental capacity is just not there. The introspection is not there.
Well, I mean, in their eyes, they had a great week. They got Snapdragon. They got Adidas, to them.
A successful quarter, probably.
I mean, you and I care about results on the pitch. They're not no consequence to them. So they had a great week. Richard Arnold's doing a great job. Forget about, the scandals, the crises, one after the next. Forget about all that stuff. And it's irrelevant. These are things that fans care about. They don't care about things that you and I care about. But just to finish up, as I've always said, in my opinion, United will never compete for the top trophies in European football again until there's a complete ideological shift and ethos at the football club, that everything from the owners, everything is derivative of an attitude of sport and excellence. And until that changes, you will never, ever, ever get it. You'll never get consistency. Everything you'll get incremental improvement and then failure, and fans will blame Ten Hag and they'll blame the next manager and the manager after that, But anyway, we'll go ahead and leave it there. Folks, thanks for all your downloads. Thanks for all your retweets, everything, for following myself and James. We appreciate all the feedback. In the next week or two, or we'll assume we'll start opening us up to questions and all that there, and we'll do them live. So much appreciated. So get in touch with us and let us know if there's any changes you want in the show, and we will go about implementing them. James, all the best, mate.
Yes, you too. Thanks again.
Cheers, Bob. Bye.
All right.